Welcome, fellow bookworms, to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney, and I have a Throwback Thursday for you guys. This Throwback Thursday is a little bit different. I thought with the passing of Anne Rice, I would go ahead and revisit the book of hers that I had read. Now, typically when I do these Throwback Thursdays, they are children's book. This is definitely not a children's book, but it is one I did read in my early teens. So I'm going to talk about that one today. I never, since this book I'm going to talk about, I've never read anything else by Anne Rice, but she was one of the first authors that was kind of on my radar. So before reading, starting to read like more adult books and such, when I read books, I would just read the book. I never really put any thought about who the author was or anything like that. I would just kind of choose books and I would just read them. And then as I got older and I started, reading more adult books, I started paying more attention to the authors themselves. And so even though I hadn't read anything else by Anne Rice, she was one of the first authors that I was kind of aware of, if that makes sense. Everybody, of course, talks about the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire, Vampire Lestat, um, Queen of the Damned, which my husband actually has the first three in a collection here. Those first three books, and then of course I think there's like three more. But I never read these. I didn't even watch Interview with a Vampire until like recently, like this past year or so. And I've never watched like Queen of the Damned or anything like that. So, but just Anne Rice, like I said, she was on my radar. Interview with a Vampire, the story, just from people talking about it, I kind of had a concept of what it was about and such. So, but yeah, the book I read though is Vittorio the Vampire, and absolutely loved this. I remember reading it, in my early teens. I can't remember if I ever reread it or not. If I did, it would have still been while I was in my teens. But there's one scene that stuck with me, and so rereading it now, I really didn't remember most of the story other than the one scene that stuck with me from way back then, and that's when Vittorio loses his family. That scene's always stuck with me, and it's definitely gonna stick with me more now that I've reread it and kind of refreshed myself with it. But it's just very beautifully written. There's something, I don't know, about the tone that the character has. Like he's just, you're very much drawn in. There's a certain like religious but spiritual aspect to it that I really enjoyed. There's a pureness to Vittorio and to Ursula too, who's one of the other characters. If you're not familiar with the book, I'm not gonna kind of spoil it, but she's one of the other characters, and there's a pureness to her as well. Um, that I don't know, you find these vampires very endearing. And basically it's the beginnings, how he became a vampire. And in the first two chapters he's kind of long-winded, which is not my favorite, but in this case he, the character calls attention to that he's, a little bit long-winded, but you know but just the way the words are used, it doesn't feel that long-winded, and so it's not a struggle to get through. And then he really kind of gets into the events that led to him becoming a vampire and the choices he made and such. And it's during the Renaissance and such in Italy, and I think the author captured that very, very well. And what I love too is she left like a little afterword that had books if you wanted to learn more about the time period and Italy and such. Some of the painters that she references, you can go find these books, and she left that kind of in an afterword at the back of the book, which I thought was wonderful. She really paints a beautiful picture of Italy and the time period and the painters and such, like the works. And Vittorio is like loves these Renaissance paintings and such. And there's one painter in particular that he's just obsessed with, and that's kind of where that religion and that spirituality comes into play. Um, And I don't know, it might be all in his head or that might have really happened. It doesn't really make that clear, but there's it's just beautiful regardless, and I absolutely love this book. Of course, I've never read anything else by her, so I really can't compare. But just based on what I know of, like Interview and the Vampire and such, and the Queen of the Damned, and just from people talking about it, and then watching Interview with the Vampire, I definitely see myself preferring this book over the more popular ones. This one's probably not as well known, but there's just a pureness there that I really, really enjoyed. There's still vampires, there's still that dark aspect as well, but I don't know. There's just something about those two characters in this book, Vittorio himself and why he made the choices he did and such, that is just very endearing, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was beautifully written. It paints a beautiful picture, like it really felt like you were there. And even though it's a completely different time, like it was brought to life for sure. So if you never read Anne Rice and you're not interested in reading like Interview with a Vampire or anything, this might be one that you would enjoy. Um, and even if you're very familiar with Anne Rice, if you've never read this book, definitely I would say pick it up because I think it's a really good one. I'll probably at some point go ahead and read, Interview with the Vampire, these at least this part of the Chronicles, these three books, just because I have them on my shelf, and my goal is to eventually make my way through all these books. So I'm definitely planning on reading those at some point, but I think this one is going to be one that I'm drawn to over those for sure. So, anyway, I think that's it for today. I definitely, it's sad with Anne Rice passing, but she definitely left a legacy that's gonna live on for sure. So, anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and leave you guys here. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.